An antique dealer is gunned down in his own home.
Henry was shot at close range.
There's two different brands of cigarettes in the ashtray.
Evidence takes police through a minefield of intimate secrets.
He would seek out young men.
They had a volatile relationship.
And Mr. Weatherford had been warned by friends and family.
False confessions and shocking U-turns would finally reveal the killer's identity.
We had a cold hit.
I'm Chris Hansen.
187.
When someone is murdered, police want to know who did it. But I want to know why.
What's your location?
That's why I'm on the road, taking you deep inside some of America's most compelling murder cases.
Suspect spotted.
This is Killer Instinct. Henry Weatherford was a man who kept secrets. His family and even some of his friends had no idea he was leading a double life that took him to some very dark places. And in the end, one of those places was dark enough to hide a killer. On June 13th, 1994, Henry Weatherford didn't show up for work. And Henry Weatherford always shows up for work. By noon, colleagues George Newby and Martin Hart are worried. By 5, they know something's wrong, and they head over to his house.
The people that arrived were his co-workers, and he had not shown up for work, which was very unusual. And that's why they were there at the house, concerned about his welfare.
Henry!
They find Henry's door unlocked.
Henry! Henry? I'll check the kitchen. Henry? Henry?
But no one answers.
When they walked in the house and they expecting to find Henry, maybe asleep or he had some company.
Henry?
They were shocked to find him upstairs, laying on his sofa.
Henry?
And even more shocked when they found out he had 4 bullets in his body.
Henry was shot at close range.
He was.
In the head and the chest.
He was.
Who does this sort of thing to someone else?
Oh. Typically, in this case here, we'll get down to someone with a personal grudge, a personal problem with the victim.
Henry left behind an ex-wife and a daughter.
How did you hear your father had been murdered?
That was very vivid. I was actually at my mom's house, my mom and stepdad, and I was sitting on the couch, and the phone rings, and my mom goes to get it. She's talking on the phone all the time. I didn't think anything of it. And then she came back and grabbed my hands and said, "I have something to tell you." I reacted like most people would. It was sort of shock, and I cried, and it's just, then it becomes this, whoa, this is what we're dealing with.
How would you best describe your father?
He was a character. I would say that's the easiest way. He was in the theater, very into that, great entertainer, infectious in that way.
Colorful.
Very much so.
Artistic.
Yes.
Creative.
Yes. Definitely the person that would have a dinner party on the regular, because that's what he liked to do.
In the year of Henry's murder, Henrico County's neighboring city, Richmond, was suffering from one of the highest murder rates in the U.S. But Henrico was much quieter. and murders of this kind were extremely rare. And where Henry lived made this case even more puzzling.
Henry lived in an old antebellum mansion. It's the kind of house that you just would not expect to find walking through that area. It sat separately from the rest of the neighborhood, completely surrounded by tall shrubbery and out of sight from lower income homes and so forth.
This has changed a little bit since when you first investigated the crime scene, obviously.
Yes, it has.
What's your first memory of walking up to the house back then?
The first memory I had was what a nice house it was. He would be very upset if he knew the place looked like this now.
It was not your typical homicide scene.
No, not at all. You would expect crime in this area, but not this house, because it stood out as being a beautifully kept home and just not something you would find.
Detective Rick Valentine and forensics investigator Danny Jameson arrive at the crime scene together. Danny's priority is to gather all the evidence as quickly as possible.
The very first thing that we do in forensics is we actually photograph the scene as it is. We work systematically. So I started at the front door and worked my way through, all the way through to the victim.
What jumped out at you?
Well, there were several things. The house was immaculate. There didn't appear to be anything out of place.
It appeared that whoever did it was there with permission of Mr. Weatherford. The scene was not disrupted.
Henry was shot 4 times with a .22 caliber pistol. The bullets later recovered during his autopsy. But the killer took the gun with him when he fled the scene.
One of the bullets had actually penetrated his eyelid as it went through his left eye.
His eyes were closed.
His eyes were closed at the time.
So whoever did this surprised him.
I would say sneaked up on him.
Danny's forensic search takes him to the kitchen, where the story of last night is revealed.
The 2 chairs were out, so I automatically got to thinking, 2 people sat at this table. And then I said, did they eat at the table? It sparked my curiosity, so I checked the dishwasher to see if he washed his dishes, and he hadn't.
He hadn't.
He had not.
So dirty dishes were in the dishwasher.
That's correct.
And was that a good find for you?
Oh, it was an excellent find for us.
Why is that?
We actually processed those dishes and got some excellent latent fingerprints.
Potentially fingerprints of the killer.
That's correct.
Danny then spots a second clue sitting in plain sight, but it could have been easily overlooked. What about this ashtray? What did that tell you?
Indicated to me that it was possibly 2 people in the room at one time. There was 2 different brands of cigarettes in the ashtray.
As the forensic evidence is bagged for analysis, investigators discover Henry's vehicle, a 1983 Oldsmobile, is missing.
It's usually right out here. It's not here.
They immediately put out an APB, hoping that if they find the car, they'll find the killer.
Yeah, this is Detective Valentine out of Henrico. I need all points on a gray Oldsmobile, registration unknown.
In the meantime, investigators turn their attention to their only witnesses, the people who found Henry's body, his business partners George Newby and Martin Hart.
So, where were you last night?
What did your gut tell you in the early stages of this investigation about George and possible involvement here?
Well, I always left open the possibility of him being involved, but nothing really led me to that.
I spent the night at home.
Right. Can anybody else verify that?
Mm-hmm. My wife?
Your wife, right. Okay.
He had the alibi of his wife, and of course, yes, she could have been lying, but
His story squared up, at least.
it did. It did.
Martin Hart tells police that he was also at home on the night of the murder.
We were watching television, went to bed about 10 o'clock.
Both men's alibis check out, and there is no forensic evidence to place them with Henry that night, which leaves police without a solid lead.
I think that'll be all. Thank you.
As his family mourns, detectives try to piece together a timeline of the hours leading up to Henry Weatherford's murder. But it's a difficult process. No one seems to know what Henry was doing that night. Then out of nowhere, police get a phone call from one of Henry's closest friends, Anne.
I went out with Henry the night of his murder.
They'd gone to a play at a local school. Henry had picked her up, and in the car was a male that Henry identified as Matt.
Matt.
Right.
Hi, Anne.
Hi, Henry.
This is Matt.
Hi, Matt.
He'll be joining us tonight. Anne then tells detectives something they didn't know about Henry. In fact, it was a closely guarded secret he kept from almost everyone except Anne. Henry was gay, and Anne had figured Matt was his latest boyfriend. So police need to find out who this Matt really is. And was he Henry's friend, his lover, or the killer himself? Police in Henrico, Virginia are now searching for Henry Weatherford's killer. The antiques dealer was gunned down in his own home, and now investigators believe the secret he tried so hard to keep, his sexuality, is at the heart of this brutal murder. In a surprise phone call, Henry's friend Anne reveals to detectives that Henry was secretly gay. So they begin to investigate Henry's double life and discover he was playing a very dangerous game.
Henry kept a secret from many people.
Well, the lifestyle was that he enjoyed the company of young men. He would seek out young men, bring them to the home. They would typically spend the night at the home. There would be sex involved. But no, he didn't share that with very many people.
Anne said in the months leading up to his murder, Henry had been meeting men at the local bus station, men he knew nothing about. Police can't rule out the possibility that this was exactly how he met the man known only as Matt. But that would leave them with the question of motive. Why would a complete stranger want to murder Henry Weatherford?
Did you have any idea your father was leading this closeted lifestyle?
You know, I feel so silly now because I feel like surely I should have known. But I think I always thought, why wouldn't he just be open with me about it? Because I wouldn't mind. When I was much younger, we had a conversation about it that he relayed to me. And I guess I had asked him something like, well, would that affect how you felt about me? And he said no. And I said, well, then I don't care.
Anne tells investigators that after their night at the theater, Henry and Matt dropped her off at her home and then drove away.
After the play, that was the last time she saw him.
And who was Matt?
Just a friend of Henry's, someone he had met. I think he told her maybe in Florida. He had just come back from Florida not long before that, but it was a recent acquaintance of Henry's.
Have you got any idea where we might have met him?
He was in Florida and Georgia scouting antique shops, maybe.
George Newby confirms that neither he nor his colleague Martin ever met Matt.
He never brought him into the shop. I know that.
You're quite sure of that?
So that makes Anne the only person who saw Henry's companion that night. Her memory of his face would be crucial to the investigation.
What else do you remember?
He was around 5'7", 150 pounds. wavy hair.
As investigators begin the statewide hunt for the man known only as Matt, police discover his family and friends had long been concerned about his reckless lifestyle.
Did he have any enemies?
I'm sure he made enemies. I don't know of any, but his choices were not always the best. I think that people aren't always able to make the best choices for themselves, and so ultimately I think those choices are what led to it.
Putting that much faith in people, bringing them to your home, of course, with this situation is completely different, but to do this kind of thing on a regular basis, and Mr. Weatherford had been warned.
Who warned him?
My understanding is that he'd been warned by friends and family about doing this. Ann said that she and Martin both had tried to discourage Henry from doing this. They told him that this kind of thing could happen.
And it did.
And it did. They felt the danger was that somebody was going to hurt him once they got to his home, because Henry had a very nice home. He appeared to be very affluent. They were afraid that somebody was going to hurt him for his money.
Ann's image of the mysterious Matt doesn't generate any hits, and time is ticking away. Whoever Matt is, he seems to be long gone.
Cassie, let's come dust this off.
And they're not having much luck with the DNA evidence at the scene.
You had solid DNA evidence, but in those days, there was no database.
No, that's right. At that particular time, when we got the DNA, it was useless to us.
But just when it looks like the search for Henry's killer is about to stall, investigators get an unexpected break. And it has nothing to do with a young man named Matt or DNA. Police in Bridgeton, Missouri have found a gray 1983 Oldsmobile, the exact make and color of Henry's missing car. It's been abandoned in a Walmart parking lot 850 miles away.
It had been noticed by the local police department. They ran the license plate as they saw it, and it didn't come back stolen, so it was disregarded. Further investigation was done, and the true license plate was discovered and found that it was Henry's car and that it had been stolen.
What was found of significance?
They found some additional fingerprints. They also found some additional cigarette butts, and a piece of bubble gum was found in the ashtray of the vehicle.
Investigators run the DNA found on the cigarette butts and chewing gum. And although the national database is still too small to give them a name, they are able to match it to the DNA found on the cigarette butts in Henry's house. Whoever was in Henry's house the night of the murder likely stole and abandoned his car. Their search for Henry's killer has now expanded by more than 800 miles. So detectives look into open cases across this larger area. That's when they find that Henry Weatherford's murder could be the latest killing in a much bigger case.
There was a serial killer that was traveling the east coast of the United States by the name of Bowles, and his MO did match what was going on. It was a homosexual killing.
By the time Henrico police are aware of him, Gary Ray Bowles has killed 6 gay men, typically meeting them in bars before going back to their home. Could Henry have been his 7th?
There were a number of investigators who thought he was the guy.
Well, it was ironic that Gary Bowles was tied into murders up and down the East Coast at this same time period. It really stuck out like a sore thumb. So we did look at that very hard.
Bowles' first victim was in Daytona Beach, Florida, and police believe that over the next 6 months, he murdered 5 more men in Florida, Georgia, and Maryland, a route that runs straight through Virginia. Bowles terrorized older gay men in a manner that mirrored many details of the Weatherford case. And on the night of Henry's murder, Gary Bowles was still at large. Was he the man Anne saw with Henry the night he was killed? Henrico detectives have their first suspect in the murder of Henry Weatherford. He's a suspected serial killer named Gary Bowles. In 1994, Bowles was targeting closeted gay men who, like Henry, wanted to keep their sexuality a secret. Police believe Bowles' latest victim is a florist in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, named Walter Hinton. The florist, just like Henry, was found murdered in his home. And his car was stolen just like Henry's. And crucially, Hinton's friends report that he recently took up with a younger man who none of his friends really knew. Just like Henry.
With what you had at that time, he was a good suspect.
It was a good reason to look at him.
Police and the FBI search for Bowles nationwide, and after 9 months, the authorities finally get a lead. On November 22, 1994, Jacksonville police spot a stolen car. They pull it over and find Gary Bowles behind the wheel.
Come up.
Detectives bring Bowles into an interrogation room and question him about the 6 murders they suspect he's committed. His MO in each killing was the same. He would befriend an older gay man, lure him somewhere, then he would rob and kill them. Investigators ask him about the murder of Henry Weatherford.
Bowles acknowledged 6 or 7 murders that he had committed and vehemently denied being involved in Henry's case. Why would he not acknowledge this one if he acknowledged all the others? We could never find any evidence really to tie him into it. And we had no reason other than the fact that he was tied into others on the East Coast.
Bowles might be lying, but the DNA evidence isn't. Forensics investigators compare his fingerprints with those found on the dishes in Henry's kitchen.
DNA that we had from the scene, we had a partial fingerprint, didn't match him.
So the evidence just didn't add up.
Didn't add up
to
to
link
him.
Gary Bowles, the serial killer,
Exactly.
to Henry's murder.
That's right.
So without the vital DNA or fingerprint match, Henrico police have no way of identifying anyone who might have been in Henry's house the night of the murder. They're back to square one, and Henry's family is left to wait and wonder.
So it was frustrating, obviously, and then you just kind of think, wow, we're going to be like one of those families you see on TV whose, the murder's never been solved.
For more than a year, the investigation stalls. The DNA collected at the crime scene and from Henry's car remains useless until they can find someone to match it to. But in March of 1995, this case takes a bizarre and shocking turn.
See you tomorrow.
A waitress at a local restaurant is finishing up after a busy dinner shift.
Hi.
She's approached by a customer who asks for a ride home.
Would you mind giving me a ride home?
Sure. Come along.
He seems harmless, so she agrees. But on the way home, everything changes. The customer turns into a knife-wielding attacker. He forces her to pull over and sexually assaults her.
Get out. Be quiet.
Please,
No, I said shut up. Don't make a sound.
After the brutal attack, she convinces him she won't go to police, and he lets her go.
I won't tell anyone, I promise, right?
But she did go to the police, and the subsequent manhunt led to an astonishing arrest. The attacker is George Newby, Henry Weatherford's business partner, and the man who discovered his body.
Henry's business partner is charged and convicted of a violent sexual assault.
Yes. He was later given 80 years in prison. You don't typically get 80 years unless it's a very severe attack. That certainly shed a lot of light on him in our investigation.
It was a strange coincidence, and Detective Rick Valentine, like most investigators, doesn't believe in coincidences. Forensic evidence didn't connect Newby with Henry's house on the night of the murder. But his violent attack on the waitress means police have to reconsider him as a suspect. If he's capable of that kind of violence, could he have killed Henry? Rick Valentine turns to George's family and friends for a deeper insight into his life. And that's when they discover that since the beginning of this investigation, George Newby has been withholding a secret he shared with Henry.
There was information they may have had some sort of a relationship.
Yes.
Sexually.
Yes.
Did he have a intimate relationship with your father as well as business?
That's what I understood after the fact. I didn't know that at the time, but yeah. It was very volatile in terms of even business-wise. I knew it was volatile.
You're not listening. Sober's not selling.
Do you really think that these woodwork projects from school kids
And so, and like I
That's
said,
a very bizarre dynamic.
oh, yes, very much so.
stuff that moves, antiques move?
I'm trying to tell you that it is not going well.
Newby had a beef with Henry, his business partner.
Yes.
Is Newby and Weatherford's secret relationship at the heart of this murder? Detectives already know Newby is a violent rapist, but is he a killer too? His alibi stood up at the time of Henry's murder.
I spent the night at home.
Anybody else verify that?
My wife?
Right.
But now detectives begin to question everything they thought they knew about him.
Henry?
It was George who discovered Henry's body with Martin. But was his shock just an act for Martin's benefit to give himself an alibi?
Did you think maybe it was in fact George Newby who did this?
Oh, I had to feel there was a possibility of it, yes.
Newby is Rick Valentine's primary focus, but in a bizarre twist before Valentine can interrogate Newby, Newby actually reaches out to him.
I need to speak to Detective Rick Valentine.
George Newby claims he knows exactly who killed his partner and ex-lover, Henry Weatherford. In 1996, while in prison for rape, George Newby contacts Henrico authorities and tells them he's been keeping a secret. Investigators head to the Virginia State Prison, where Newby is serving his 85-year prison sentence. Newby appears nervous, and there's clearly something weighing heavily on his mind. But no one could have guessed that something would send a shockwave through the entire investigation.
I killed Henry Weatherford.
What did you think when you had heard George Newby had confessed to Henry's murder?
What I felt was surprise, and I guess confusion, but surprise that he might be involved in the murder.
Did you think it was possible that your father's business partner, George Newby, had killed him?
There was a lot of distrust, especially among my family, based on the fact that they had a volatile relationship. I mean, I know now there was more to the relationship than business partners.
He was just napping, so I walked in, I shot him once in the chest, 3 times in the head.
With George Newby's confession, it looks like investigators have finally found Henry Weatherford's killer.
Didn't touch anything.
But that's only how it looks.
And he knew the details of the murder, how many times he was shot, where he was shot. And then he confesses.
But then he's one of them that found the body. He knew all these things, the details he's given us, he was there. He was there before the police were there.
As detectives continue to question George Newby about the details of the Weatherford murder, his story gets hazy. He doesn't know crucial details about the crime, details the killer would know. And the biggest red flag? He had no idea what really happened to Henry's car or that it was found 800 miles away in Missouri. That, coupled with the fact there was no forensic evidence placing Newby at the murder scene, puts investigators in the odd position of chipping away at a suspect's confession. And when they do, it crumbles.
Why would George Newby confess to a murder he didn't actually commit?
What I felt was he thought that if he confessed to it, that they would charge him with it, that he'd be found guilty of capital murder and be put to death. And that's what he wanted because he received 80 years or so on the other case.
On the sexual assault case?
Yes. That's the way his mind was working. That's what he was thinking. Once we had cleared George Newby and we realized that, that he was not the one involved, we really had nowhere to turn.
They didn't know it at the time, but George Newby's misguided confession would be the last lead detectives would have in 6 years. It seemed the killer's identity would remain secret and that he would never pay for the senseless murder of Henry Weatherford.
You get reassigned to other cases.
Right.
This case, Henry's case, goes cold.
Pretty much.
Freezing cold.
Pretty much.
Did you think this could have been an unsolved mystery?
I would have to say yes, but I knew that at some point down the road that DNA and the partial fingerprint were going to be a big help in solving the matter.
Years went by. Did you move on, or was this always in the back of your mind?
Oh, it was always in the back of my mind. Any case like this that goes unsolved doesn't leave your mind. I thought about it a lot. Typically, in a case like this, it's just going to be somebody coming forward with information that we just didn't have before.
Somebody starts talking who didn't talk before.
Sure. Somebody gets caught in another crime, admits to this one.
For 6 long years, there's not a single lead. During that time, not much changes with the Weatherford case. But then in 2001, investigators decide that it might be time to bring Henry Weatherford out of the cold case files.
In 2001, we resubmitted the cigarette butts to the state laboratory, and the National Databank System for DNA had come about.
What finally happened?
They gave us a name and address, a race and sex of the suspect that was in the databank system. We had a cold hit.
The hit turns out to be a man named Lonnie Weissman. But that isn't a name that has come up any time in this investigation. So Henrico police now have to discover who this Lonnie Weissman really is, and could he be Henry Weatherford's killer?
Henry?
For 6 years, someone has gotten away with Henry Weatherford's murder. But now, Henrico police detective Rick Valentine has a lead that could finally solve this baffling case and put a killer behind bars. Resubmitting the forensics into the national database has given police a match with the name Lonnie Weissman. His DNA is in the database because of a series of armed robberies he committed. These are violent crimes, but not murder.
Did you go talk to Lonnie Wiseman?
We did.
How would you describe Lonnie Wiseman in terms of the interview, his demeanor?
Calm, self-assured. One of these, if you've got it, charge me.
Bring it on.
Right. Let me see it. Bring it on. Right. We knew pretty much right away that that's what we were going to get.
And what did he say?
Had no idea what we were talking about.
No idea?
No idea. Never been to Virginia. Never been to Richmond. Never been to Henrico County.
Did you believe him?
No. No, we didn't. But that was pretty much all he was going to say.
He had told the case investigator that he had never been to Virginia. So I've immediately blown that alibi that he had never been to Virginia because I have him in Virginia. I have his DNA in Virginia and his fingerprints. I guess we'd say we were lucky on that his samples were in the databank system.
But the fact that the name Lonnie Wiseman hasn't come up in any part of the investigation still puzzles detectives. That is, until they get a call from Indiana police. They have connected the details of the Weatherford murder with a disturbing phone call they received 6 years earlier, shortly after Henry Weatherford's murder. A young woman had phoned them. She was concerned about a man she had spent the evening with, who'd boasted about shooting someone 4 times and stealing his car.
We had a witness that had contacted us. This was a woman that he had met in a bar. He'd gone home with her, and during a conversation with that witness,
And so then I picked up my gun.
he acknowledged
Cocked it.
killing a man,
Boom. 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 Boom.
shooting a man.
In the face. And then I stole his car.
And he had just given her these details, but he didn't give her all the details and didn't tell her where it had happened. She thought that it had happened in Ohio because he had told her that he'd been in Ohio. The Ohio authorities said they had no case like this.
The information she gave was useless at the time, but could be the critical evidence missing in this case. It was his name that would complete the puzzle. He had called himself Matt, and Matt was the name of the young man Henry's friend Ann had met the night of the murder.
This is Matt. He'll be joining us tonight.
Looking deeper into Lonnie Wiseman's arrest, Henrico detectives discovered that when Lonnie Wiseman was arrested in Arkansas, officers recovered a fake ID he was using. The name on the ID brings the investigators back to the earliest days of the case. That name, Matthew Sean Grimes. Matt.
Boom. Boom.
He had used the name Matt with Henry, and he had used the name Matt when he went out to Indiana.
That was his alias.
That's right. That's right.
It was a big break in the case. Shortly after that revelation, Henrico police receive a call from Lonnie Wiseman's roommate in Chubbuck, Idaho. He wants to hand over a weapon Wiseman had left at the house. It turns out to be a .22 caliber pistol, the same kind of gun used to kill Henry Weatherford.
Do you think that was the same pistol used in the murder?
I do.
What makes you say that?
I just think he had the gun and never got rid of it until he got caught for the armed robbery.
Finally, Henrico police have all the evidence Rick Valentine and Danny Jameson need to identify the killer and place him in Henry's house the night of his murder.
We finally knew at that point that we had the right man when both the fingerprints and the DNA from the Weatherford home matched up with Lonnie Wiseman.
How do you think this crime went down?
I think that Mr. Weatherford brought Lonnie Wiseman to the house. I think that we have no reason to believe that Lonnie Wiseman was gay. I've yet to have anyone tell me that he was. I believe that Henry made a pass at him. It insulted Lonnie, and I think that's when he killed him.
But he was a hustler and a criminal.
Yes.
Could he have been hustling a gay man?
Could be. Could be. Some kind of disagreement, something that happened between the two of them.
It was personal.
I think it was, yes.
The way the shots were fired.
Yes.
If you could ask Lonnie Wiseman one thing, what would it be?
Why did it come to this? Why did Henry die? What happened that caused it to go that bad?
Lonnie Weissman pleads no contest to the murder of Henry Weatherford. This means there would be no court case, and the details of the killing will remain unknown. He is, however, sentenced to 23 years in prison.
Have you been able to find closure?
Very much so. I mean, that was good to know that, okay, this feels like this is who did it, and he's in prison. Bringing that full circle was a good feeling. I don't feel like there's anything hanging out there. I've never felt like they didn't get the right person. I always wish I could have heard him say, yes, I did it, but you know, who wouldn't want that in that situation? So I feel good about how the outcome resolved.
What do you miss most?
You know, I think he had the potential for a lot of joy, and not only experiencing it, but giving it to other people. So I miss that. I miss that, you know, he obviously never met my son, and that he couldn't be somebody that could go live to be an old man, you know, and hopefully be happy.